when I was trying to write a melody, I was thinking, well, what would D'Angelo write? What would Dee sing on this?
You just heard the legendary bassist Pino Palladino describing his inspiration for writing the melody of Just Wrong, the lead single from his new collaboration with guitarist, producer, and songwriter Blake Mills. Recently, the three of us got together over Skype to discuss the new album, Notes with Attachments. And the thing is, our conversation was filled to the brim with mind-blowing nuggets of wisdom. So this episode of Score Study with me, briankrock, is going to be a bit different. I just couldn't bear to edit the interview down, so you're about to hear it in its entirety. Don't worry, I've still included illustrative scores and audio and all that other good stuff, but if you don't have an hour to kill, there's a table of contents in the description, so you can feel free to jump around if you want. I came to get down, so get out your seat and jump around. See, usually on this show, I like to edit my interviews down to only the most essential quotes so that I can build a structure around those moments that tells an interesting story. However, Pino and Blake reminded me that great art often comes as a result of being open to chance, of rescinding your control and just letting things happen. And in this case, I think our conversation sort of serendipitously took on a form that mirrors the album in interesting ways. This dawned on me as I pondered the meaning of the album's title. I was wondering about the title of that song, Notes with Attachments. Is that a reference to the back and forth of working remotely? Or is it a reference to maybe the musical notes having all that manipulation attached to them?
It can be anything. All of it. I wouldn't really want to define it because it allows for that interpretation.
So, as you listen, keep that phrase in mind, notes with attachments, and observe how its meaning morphs. Most obviously, we spent a lot of time talking about how Blake manipulated Pino's notes by attaching things like effects plugins or routing the audio through strange outboard gear, and just generally exercising production and engineering magic. But then, as we dive into Pino's composition, Just Wrong, bear in mind how he attached colorful notes, such as upper structure triads, to his bass lines. Finally, you'll notice that this album was the result of a generous collaboration between many artists, sending their ideas back and forth, just like you would email notes with attachments to your coworkers. Each song on this record changed drastically over 2.5 years of collaboration. Pino's original musical ideas were manipulated not just by Blake Mills, but also by Chris Dave, Marcus Strickland, Sam Gendel, Larry Goldings, and more. Okay, so without further ado, here's my conversation with Pino Palladino and Blake Mills. If you'd like to see more content like this, please click like and click subscribe, and consider checking out my Patreon page to support the channel. So Blake, I was just reading to Pino an email that I got from Steve Swallow, who was one of actually my first guests on Score Study. And ever since then, we've had a correspondence going via email. And I was sharing Steve's thoughts about Pino's playing. And I just want to finish up because there's a couple sentences at the end in which Steve describes your playing Pino in a very perceptive and exciting way. And so if you guys don't mind, I just have a couple sentences from Steve Swallow. He said, Pino's among the handful of bass players whose work I love. And I mean love, not admire, respect, or any other such thing. His playing hits me right in the heart. I don't know if he remembers, it's been a long while, but we shared a concert once. You were playing with Manu Katché and a young guitar player, and this is Steve Swallow's quote here. He says, "You sang like fucking Caruso." I don't know what he's talking.
I don't know. Yes, I was playing. Yeah, he was probably talking about fretless bass. Maybe you like the sound of that. That's such a compliment.
I see. He's talking about, I wasn't sure if you actually sang. And then he said, I might add that Pino's playing on D'Angelo's Voodoo gave my sense of where to put it a nudge it's never recovered from. He said, I don't want to get precious about this, so I'll repeat, I love Pino's playing. Pino always plays in context. He thinks like a composer and gives each song he plays specifically what it needs. He neither over nor underplays. His focus is narrowed to exactly what counts: the attack, duration, and register of each note. His relationship to what's happening above him. And then he says, no sense in my going on. Ask him about this stuff and you'll get better information than I could give. But I just thought that was so beautiful. I had to share it with you guys. And so I think that's a good place to start because, Pino, you have a lot of songwriting credits, co-songwriting credits. But I think this might be your first record where your name is listed as a band leader.
Yeah, that's correct. Absolutely, Brian. Yeah. But I'm just trying to get over what you just quoted me from Steve. Yeah, incredible. I mean, I'm just trying to take that in. I mean, really, yeah. What he said there is what I've been trying to do from my whole career, without analyzing it. Is just to fit into the music and not necessarily to take the song over, but to make some sort of statement and try and make it better in some way. And he encapsulated it in what he said there. So that really means a lot to me. That's incredible.
Cool. Yeah, I think that maybe part of why you're listed as a co-composer on so many songs is because the bass lines that you write add something that becomes a necessary part of the composition of these songs. Like you add hooks and melodic elements that the song wouldn't be nearly as good without.
I would like to think that, but I think it's more down to the generosity of the people who have given me songwriting credits, to be honest, because if it were on the basis that you just mentioned, I would have had thousands of songwriting credits, as opposed to whatever they are. They're not that many. So yeah, I'd like to think that it would be in the parts that I come up with, but I think it's more generosity from the artists I'm working with to share. For instance, Erica Badu, I remember going to the studio with Erica, and she booked me to do some sessions with Questlove and James. We just turned up at the studio, and then she just said to us, "What have you got, guys?" So that was obviously going to be a collaborative thing, but that sort of generosity is, there's not so many artists like that.
Would you say that the way that you guys composed the music for Notes with Attachments is sort of similar? It sounds like Pino, you provided a lot of the core ideas in the songs, and then maybe Blake did some assembly after the fact. I was wondering if you guys could just talk about how you actually went about composing this material.
Go ahead, Blake.
Well, it was. You're right, Brian. It was everything on the record, save for maybe one song, was founded upon an idea that Pino had brought in or developed. Sometimes those ideas were sort of loosely, what would you call it? Well, they were loosely constructed around either a bass line or a chord progression. Sometimes they were fully fleshed out songs, with a melody and arrangement. And in each case, our process was dictated by the idea and whatever form, it came in. Sometimes we would spend a few weeks dissecting essentially a loop of drums and bass, and trying to figure out a way to make a second or third iteration of that loop feel like a different performance and a different dynamic. and maybe that would be punching in some new part or some new harmonic information to change the definition of what was there before. Sometimes it was getting a little tweaky with plugins and trying to make the performances actually just sound like, new parts. And then in other instances, there were songs that we, like in one example, Man From Molise was a pre-existing song when I heard it. I'm sorry, a pre-existing recording when I heard it. Pino played me this version of the song with some incredible, unbelievable playing on it, and the song itself was twice as fast as the way that we recorded it. And as I was listening and trying to process everything that was going on, I was craving hearing it slowed down. And so in Pro Tools, you can do this thing where you hit shift and spacebar at the same time. It'll play anything back at half speed. So we just listened to it at half speed, and all of a sudden it was like, it went from being this this kind of rapid fire Afro-Cuban jazz ensemble to being like Tom Waits and the Lounge Lizards playing the song. And that was the inspiration behind how we recorded it. We were trying to play in such a way and get sounds that were reminiscent of the way things sounded at half speed, where the transients are super long and the timing and the feel is sort of inebriated. So the I guess, to try to tie it back into your question, the composition of the record, the compositional voice is, I think, fundamentally Pino's compositional voice, and the arrangements even are based on his aesthetic as an arranger. And I was there to try to facilitate that, on a case-by-case basis and respond to it.
I want to highlight a word you used, which is inebriated, because as I've been listening to this record, I've been sort of meditating on how inevitable the time feels ever since essentially what Pino, Questlove, and D'Angelo did in 2000 or so with Voodoo. And what Steve Swallow alluded to, you sort of fundamentally altered the way that we all feel quarter notes. And so now in a song like Just Wrong, it's, the way that, for example, Sam Gendel phrases the melody and the sort of switching back and forth between eighth note as a subdivision and quarter note triplets as a subdivision, that all just feels like such a part of the, at least in the jazz and sort of neo-soul world, it feels like a fundamental part of the rhythmic language today. Was that something that just sort of bloomed naturally as you guys were playing? Were you thinking at all about your interpretation of the time, or did it just sort of happen that way?
I would say a combination of both those things, actually. I think that the composition of that tune is informed by the music that you mentioned from Voodoo and Jay Dilla and that era when we did a lot of recording of Electric Lady. Just in, as you said, the time feel with it being a little bit ambiguous. Is it swinging? Is it straight? Is it behind the beat? Is it just lazy? What is it?
Right.
So that's become very natural way of expression for me, and even to the point now, where I write with that in mind. So I think that feel was inherent in the composition anyway. And Sam is totally hip to that, and also Larry when they came in, when I had an idea for the melody on that. I guess if I'm honest, when I was trying to write a melody, I was thinking, well, what would D'Angelo what would Dee sing on this? What kind of thing could he sing? How can I come up with a melody for this? So the melody is definitely informed by that feel that you mentioned. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm pleased it came out in the music.
And I don't want to get too nerdy here, Pino, but I do notice in that song in particular, I assume you've been aware of everything that's been going on Blake's Instagram with hundreds and hundreds of guitar players,
yes,
bass players, every kind of instrumentalist sending in their interpretation of the song. And it's been so fun to watch because the song treads this line between it sounds digestible, it sounds pretty conventional, but there are all these really intricate details that most people are missing. And as I was, working on it and playing through it, it seemed to me that maybe you were thinking a lot about upper structure triads, for lack of a better word. There's a lot of like E flat over D flat, F over G flat. These triads in Blake's part that are obliquely related to your bass notes. Does that resonate at all, or?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's almost essential for me to hear that stuff. I love it. The richness of chords and the upper extension harmonies. Absolutely, it's always an inspiring thing for me to find some of those voicings and just start imagining. It just seems to open up things for me.
Another sort of inevitable touchstone of this record, I think. I have no idea what you gentlemen were thinking, but it's hard not to think of Weather Report. I think that, from my perspective, Pino, you spent a lot of your early career playing fretless bass. And more recently, it seems that vintage basses like jazz bass or P bass have been more common for the gigs that you have to do. So hearing you again on fretless bass, you really hear the Jaco influence in your playing. And on a song like the fourth track on the record, I can't remember what it's called. It sounds so much like a Weather Report song to me. It's got this sort of beautiful, like a remark you made.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I remember saying to Blake at the time, because that composition, I think you're talking about Notes with Attachment.
Yes, the title track.
Yeah, so Larry brought in an idea that stemmed from Larry's something that Larry played us. Blake will tell you a story about that. It got quite involved how we arrived at the final result. But yeah, I definitely heard what you're talking about in that composition of Larry's, and I think that probably inspired playing fretless bass on it. When I first started playing bass, it was sort of late 70s, and when Jaco's first album came out, that was like a serious kick at the arse, slap in the face for anyone who played bass. So sad loss.
Yeah. Blake, could you tell us the story that Pino's alluding to about constructing notes with attachments?
Yeah, that was, as Pino said, that was an idea that stemmed from an improvisation that Larry had. He brought in and he'd done it on some kind of a MIDI keyboard. So I believe the sample he was using was like a collection of saxophone, like some Ben Webster, like single notes that he'd mapped out across the keys, and maybe a couple other saxophone players. I can't remember, but he had performed this thing on this saxophone bank, and it felt kind of like of the same world as some of the harmony he was doing in Just Wrong, with the placements of the melody and the extensions and stuff you guys were talking about. And so to to follow suit with what we had done with the other songs on the record and trying to expand, a singular idea out into something more multidimensional, we took the MIDI information rather than the audio, the saxophone samples, and kind of fed that out to different receiving instruments. A Prophet synth, and trying to think of what else we had in there. Maybe like, I don't know, we might have run it through an MS-20 at one point to get kind of like a single melody. But we were doing this thing where we had multiple instruments set up in the room to perform it, all at the same time, and so we would get this kind of orchestral, three-dimensional, lifelike thing from something that, in the box can kind of come across as sort of two-dimensional sometimes.
Right.
That sort of sound. So yeah, that one was like a bit of like extracting this thing that was brand new, wrapping our heads around it, and at the same time trying to dismantle it, and as things were appearing and new sounds were appearing, it was like, maybe we could add this kind of thing, and Pino had played the melody on fretless, as he said, and then all of a sudden it was like somebody heard a counterpoint or a harmony to it, and Sam came in to sort of map that out across. It might be one of the only songs on the record where it's only one, like it's a monophonic gesture from Sam, actually.
Interesting.
The other layers are fretless guitar, but the main melodies are sax and fretless bass.
I was wondering about the title of that song, Notes with Attachments. Is that a reference to the back and forth of working remotely, or is it a reference to maybe the musical notes having all that manipulation attached to them?
It can be anything. All of it. I wouldn't really want to define it because it allows for that interpretation.
Sure. Yeah. And, this record has something that, frankly, not a lot of jazz records have in the modern day, which is the creativity in the actual engineering and production. Like Blake, you were just talking about. This is something sort of that I associate again with 70s and 80s jazz. Then it sort of seemed to disappear as the jazz world became more focused on a group, groups playing live in a studio, that kind of aesthetic. So it's exciting to hear, a new, jazz adjacent record that has all these little details that are such a joy to listen to. For example, you hear drinking glasses clinking, or you hear, Blake, you're such an incredible designer of the sort of space of a mix. There's all these awesome little itchy textures all throughout, and they don't repeat really. They just sort of come in and out of focus, which is, again, something that I think could only have come from your experience working as a producer for so many years.
Well, I enjoy that part of listening. I enjoy that part of the listening experience just as much as I enjoy the other approach of feeling like you're just in the room with an ensemble as it's happening, and I really have a lot of respect for maybe the primary reason, if I had to guess, as to why in any genre there might be it might lean towards the more naturalistic style of engineering or capturing. It's like to stay out of the way and not influence the moment. I get that sort of like understanding of the fragility of what might happen in the studio with a band, and how hard it is to just get the level of performance in a studio as you might have outside of the studio, or live or in rehearsals, like that weird red light jinx thing. So I guess knowing that that's real and that exists, I do take an interest in trying to elaborate on the set it and forget it method of just putting up the mics and capturing it and it's done. Like sometimes that's great, and at the heart of everything, there should be a performance that feels like that. But I do like to, in listening back to that kind of a recording, personally, my mind starts to expand upon little things that I hear, like an overtone or part of what's so enjoyable about listening to music is where it leads your brain. So to just kind of elaborate on a thought like that, or underscore a thought like that, that's the ethos behind an overdub, is to try to have it emphasize something that might already be there or might be implied in such a way that doesn't detract from the way it sounded with nothing additional on there in the first place. Like there's so many overdubs and things that we tried on this music that you don't hear, as like complex or busy as some of these tracks might sound. There was a lot of discernment, from everybody when it came down to like whether it needed something or not, or was improved by something or not.
And did the final form of the songs, did that come about in the process of the editing and the overdubbing? Like, for example, Just Wrong, I think, has a really fucking cool form where you don't, I guess it's Chris Dave's drums come in for maybe 8 bars or maybe even less than that at the sort of climax of the song. And there's this repetitive bridge that, has Rob Moose's violin arrangements and a bunch of swirling sounds, and the chord qualities are slightly altering each time, like really intricate details to this form that's sort of got this shape that's kind of like whoop, and then it goes back down. It just sort of peaks for a moment. And I wonder how much of that form was like present in your mind, Pino, as you were writing, and how much of it just sort of presented itself when you started dealing with the material.
Yeah, I mean, that was basically I'm trying to remember. I think it was pretty much a 4-chord sequence with that bridge idea when I first came up with the idea. And then when I presented it to Blake in the form that I had it, which was a demo I had made with Chris at home in London, Chris had played this really original feel, this sort of beat that was half kind of 4/4 and half 6 or 3 or whatever, and I wrote the chord sequence to that beat, which also informed that feel we were talking about earlier, sort of behind the beat, swung straight. What is it? But when I presented it to Blake, he had some other changes in it. I think you added another chord to the bridge, and we just kind of moved stuff around a little bit until it became an interesting sort of whatever the bars are, the 7 bars or something. It's not even.
Yeah.
And the arrangement just sort of followed on from there in a very natural fashion, really. So that started off with just the chordal arrangement with bass and guitar and a click probably. And then Chris came in and played on it and played the beautiful cymbal work and all the sort of stuff you hear, the original beat from the song. And he kept saying to me, Yeah, I got it. I got you. And he just, that place in the middle where the drums playing full rhythm, we had left a space there, Blake, right? That was the sort of groove section of the song. And it just fitted perfect when Chris brought that beat in just for that section. So I think it was quite natural the way that we ended up arranging it. But no, I hadn't composed it. It wasn't like a through composition. Like I didn't come up with that whole thing. It was fleshed out. We fleshed out the arrangement before anyone played on it. We didn't change it.
Yeah, I remember like at my house, once we had sort of realized the different sections that we had, the kind of like A section, B section, and then an idea for like an outro. I remember sitting down with you and kind of mapping out, how long we might live on each section and build, a pretty tough arrangement of it, or like a blueprint of it. But I don't remember how we had intended that section where the drums do come in with the beat, where you're playing your line and the chords are more of like an E flat minor. I don't remember what we intended for that before, knowing that that's where Chris was going to put the beat, and only where it was going to go. Like there's some things that it almost feels like there was a third person there in the room that must have come up with it, because I have no recollection.
I don't remember it either, but I do remember when we were putting it down, I was in my mind, I thought when Chris plays on this, because I always had him in mind to play on it, he'll probably play that beat. But of course, being Chris, that wasn't going to happen. We had a completely different. When we presented him what the song sounded, it was a much more sort of open, airy sort of space the song was living in, and Chris, he's such a treasure. He just knew what to do. Just his instincts were so correct for that song.
When did you meet Chris? Was it working with D'Angelo, or was it before that?
No, it was before that. I was aware of Chris. I'd seen, I think John Mayer actually had showed me a video of Chris playing on the David Letterman show with Mos Def, doing a song, is it called Quiet Dog or something? There's a song Mos Def did with Chris and a DJ. I don't know who was the DJ. I should know that. But anyway, it was stunning. I watched this and I was totally blown away, and I thought, who is that playing the drums? Move on a few years, and me and Chris had texted each other a few times. I'd never met him, but every time he came to London, we were trying to hook up. He was playing a lot with Robert Glasper and Derek Hodge at the time. And but the first time I met him was actually at Shangri-La Studios with Rick Rubin for Adele's 21 album. We were both booked to play on that album, so the first time we physically met and played together was on 21.
And I imagine there's a lot of great players that you play with, and you don't have the kind of magical chemistry that you do with Chris. Even though they're wonderful musicians, there's something special about the hookup that the two of you have. Was that apparent from the first moment, or did it develop over years of playing together and touring together, or was it? Can you describe how that?
I think it was there before we even played together, without getting too out there. I think it was always going to be that. I say when I first heard Chris, I just knew we were gonna connect.
And let's talk a little more as well about some of the other guests on the record. Obviously, Marcus Strickland's bass clarinet is a huge part of the sonic imprint of this record. Also, the sort of lower octave effects on the bass clarinet are so reminiscent of a lot of your bass playing, Pino, with the octave pedal over the years. But it's exciting for me as a saxophone player to see Marcus and Sam playing alto on Jerkle. So could you talk a little bit about working with Marcus and how you got to know him?
Yeah, personally, I got to know Marcus through Chris Dave. We had done some gigs just under the banner of Chris Dave and Friends. I did so many around Europe and a few in America too. I can't remember when I first met Marcus, but yeah, we just called him in to bring the bass clarinet to a session in New York, which was on that song Akute. And that was the first song that Blake heard, actually, of any of my music. That was the first time he'd been exposed to any of my tunes. And yeah, Marcus he's an incredible improviser. But also, compositionally, I love his solo albums, and I got to play a couple of tracks on one of the records. Yeah, I just love him, love where he's coming from. And he came up with that fantastic line on Akute at the beginning and tracked it and put a harmony on it, and it's such a unique sound, such a huge part of the character of that sound. Song rather,
yeah.
But there was some interesting tweaking, I have to say. Do you remember Blake? Because Blake came up with that fantastic section where it slows down and goes to that acoustic guitar and beautiful harmony. And then you kind of brought in that other chord that was more sort of a major feel to it. And I had an idea to bring the saxophones back in there.
Yeah. I know it goes to almost like melodic minor,
Exactly.
I think.
Yes.
And so I took a line that Marcus had played elsewhere and put it in Melodyne and just kind of like tried to nudge certain things to sort of make a new line and stuff. Cool. And I didn't know if it was going to work or sound good, but it actually, I mean, it sounds pretty authentic. So,
I mean, that was the big part. That was a big thing for me when that happened. That was at Tony Berg's place, actually, when we were working on that. At Tony Berg's studio. First time we pulled that song up after you had played on it, Marcus. And I remember saying to you, it'd be so great to get the saxes here, but what can we do? Because they're playing, the notes don't quite fit. And you went, no problem, we can just, and you did it. And I was like, okay.
It was like a scene from Hackers. Start chain smoking and 6 cups of coffee later, I'm in the mainframe.
It was over very quickly. It was about 10 minutes later. It was there. Just as I imagined it. It was like, wow, that is incredible. Yeah.
That's so cool. Speaking of Tony Berg, this is just a random aside, but his brother, I don't know if you guys know his brother, A. Scott Berg, but that's my fiance's godfather. And yeah. And I only just found out that his brother Tony is Tony Berg.
Hilarious.
But hearing his name makes me think of the Phoebe Bridgers record that I know you played a lot of stuff on, Blake. Is it true that you played clarinet on that record?
It is, yeah. I've been known to play a few clarinet notes here and there. I play a little clarinet on our record, I think, at certain spots. But
I was wondering. I heard some clarinet, and I was wondering if that was you or Marcus.
I'm still in the whatever the equivalent of the white keys on the clarinet. I'm still kind of in that, hanging out in that territory.
But it adds such a cool thing to hear. I mean, just going back again to sort of the intricacy of these sonic collages that you guys made. It's a different sound to hear an amateurish clarinet player, and it's equally cool, because it's very different than hearing you know what I mean?
I mean, to me, there's an elegance in even the fundamentals of a note out of a reed instrument. There's so much information and texture in that would be unlike the it's like such an extreme part of guitar that I've fixated on, trying to figure out how to get some of that there's vibrato, right? And there's tremolo and these different forms of modulation, but there isn't quite the same version of like, we talked about Ben Webster for a second, that breath element that comes in and out at the end of the note, that's almost like wheezing, almost like you can't really do that on a stringed instrument, save for maybe with a slide on round one string. Sometimes you have a little of that texture from the vibrato, but it's an aspect of tone shaping that I've been trying to figure out how to do on guitar, because I just love it so much on wind. So it's funny to hear horn players hear and go like, oh man, yeah, that clarinet, I heard that in there. Yeah, that was cute. That was a nice little, it's like, it was so
I didn't say, I did not say cute.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I'm like a puppy standing on its hind legs, pretending to be a human to get a treat, with the clarinet on this record amongst these giants. But I'm really just doing it because it's a thing I haven't figured out how to get on guitar yet. I'm getting close though.
Are there any guitar players that you think have gotten there or come closer?
No, I've never heard it on guitar. I've never heard it on guitar. It's just like I have that. I think a lot of musicians have this with their respective instruments. That sort of like you grow a distaste for hearing that instrument and you fall in love with other ones. But with a few exceptions, I think most of us still have a sort of familiarity with our own instrument to where if we took up another one, it's, like learning a language or something, you get frustrated because you're used to it being so quick and you have this intimate relationship with it. For me, it's guitar. So to not be able to do the things that I'm hearing in my head on another instrument, it just sends me back to guitar to try to figure out if there's some way, to coax it.
Yeah, that as a saxophone player, I'm a woodwind doubler, and like before the pandemic hit, I was getting a lot of my work playing Broadway shows, and so like I've spent a lot of time trying to like perfectly play the clarinet or the oboe, play it with like correct technique. And the alto saxophone being my main instrument, I found myself like purposefully choosing gear that makes it really hard. Like I play a saxophone from 1920 that's super whacked out of tune. I play really hard reeds and a mouthpiece with a small tip opening. I do a lot of things purposefully to make it so that it's not easy. And I feel like maybe you would relate to that because, for example, like watching you play solo a song like If I'm Unworthy, where the guitar part is just fucking insane and it didn't have to be that hard. It seems like you purposefully put yourself into situations where, I mean, the same is true for Just Wrong. That guitar part is really, really hard.
Well, okay, to be fair, the guitar part on Just Wrong that everybody's been playing on Instagram is not found anywhere on the record. I mean,
you just said it.
It's a combination, but I mean, it's obvious. Like you can hear it on the, it's a combination of the chordal part and the bass line, which is what the guitar part of If I'm Unworthy is as well. And there are a lot of guitarists that play that way. I think, a lot of the finger picking stuff you learn early on, if you're inclined on guitar, a lot of like acoustic alternating thumb bassline stuff is pretty familiar and opened up maybe an understanding when I first heard Charlie Hunter, and saw Charlie Hunter play and understood what he was doing. I mean, that's like a magic trick, watching somebody do that over and over and over again. He's just he's crawling out of the tank, the dump, with the chains on night after night. He's like somehow pulling this thing off that you're like, that shouldn't, if you start analyzing it, you're like, that shouldn't be possible to do that effortlessly and that tastefully. And so I think spending a lot of time playing alone and trying to accompany myself and figure out ways of having a bass line and chordal stuff happening at the same time, or melody and chordal stuff. That became just the natural way that I play, or like, hear music or hear guitar. And it's not so foreign anymore. It's kind of like part of like, when people sit down to play a drum kit, there's all this separation going on with their limbs, the kick part and the hi-hat part and the snare. It's like, that stuff's really complicated for, most people to think about in terms of, individual voices on a stringed instrument or whatnot, but it's the fundamentals of playing drums. So as soon as you just orient your thinking a little bit to something, it's no longer as complicated or as hard as it actually sounds.
It reminds me a lot of, well, like Toninho Horta, or like João Gilberto, or somebody who I always associate with this kind of guitar playing is Elliott Smith, like, where you're playing these really, if you think about it, really insanely complicated stuff with your right hand. That's rhythmic and complex. And then you're able to sing and float over the top and phrase freely. To somebody who doesn't do that, it seems like wildly impossible.
I think the key part of the phrase is like, if you think about it, it's really complicated. And I don't think, I think there's time that you put in to it so that you get to a place where you're no longer thinking about it as the player. And then you can do things that you kind of hear when somebody's thinking, and they're playing. That has a certain sound to it. Mm-hmm. And there's some music that, like, it's probably impossible to perform without thinking about it. Like, that's just always going to be the case. But when you hear people play something and they've gone past that cerebral thing, that's like part of that magic. As the listener, you're not in on it. You're left to sort of like make sense of what's going on and try to figure out how it's working. But it's rarely that complicated. Like, I remember sweep picking, like, hearing that and like, how, hang on, that doesn't sound like, that doesn't sound right. What's going on here? And then when you realize that you're capable of doing it, it's no longer as intoxicating. At least it wasn't for me. You hear it, you figure out, oh, okay, this is what's going on, and the tone is kind of doing a lot of the work for you sometimes. And it was no longer the kind of thing where it's like, okay, I'm gonna figure out all the different sweep licks.
Right. And I relate to that so deeply. When you're young, you're sitting up in your bedroom practicing for like 8 hours, just trying to like shred or whatever. But as you get older, you realize that, not to blow smoke, but like Pino, to me, you're sort of the gold standard of somebody who represents musical maturity. Like, the challenge of playing the way that you play is removing your ego, forgetting about trying to impress or show something, and instead thinking, what can I add that the music needs? And that's something that's simultaneously so deep and also so hard to learn. I wonder if Pino, you could just talk a little bit about how you approach like your instrument in that way. I'm not sure what to call that quality, but other than good taste, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it is down to taste in the end. It's a hard question, really, to get a good answer for. I'm thinking about it now. I mean, I joke sometimes. I always say, look, as long as I don't make this song worse, everything's going to be fine. So that's like the lowest possible thing that could happen is I play on a song and it just wouldn't sound as good as it did before I played on it. So as long as I get above that threshold, I'm doing okay. And then it's a question of, is there any space in this song to bring some of myself into it? And if I do, will it make any difference? Will it actually make any difference to the listener? So there's probably not much I can do here. So then I have to concentrate on the tiny details, like, can I make a passing note that will add something? How am I going to get from this chord to that chord? Just really sort of simple stuff, really. And other times, I may hear something and just think, yeah, I can already hear what I'm going to play on this. Sometimes there are melodies and sort of, like Blake was talking earlier about the stuff you hear in between the notes, suggestions of bass lines or melodies that come from overtones and nuance in the music. So this. Yeah, and I've been lucky enough to work with so many great artists and producers over the years, and hopefully have picked up, a lot of skills from being around such brilliant people, and just tried to use them, to be able to express what I want to in the studio. I'm not sure if that's good, but that's all I got.
That's a great answer. So would I be wrong to assume that in general your approach, I guess, is very intuitive? I would imagine. Did you have any formative teachers or specific bass players or songwriters who you actually studied with, or do you mostly just sort of? Does it come from just listening a lot, being very present when you're working with other people? Do you know what I'm asking? Like,
yeah. No, I didn't have a kind of a guru or any kind of teacher that guided me. Actually, to be honest, it just comes from listening and like you said earlier, it's down to your taste, isn't it? What you use and how you use it. Yeah, so really just listening to so much music over the years and trying to learn from the brilliant producers and artists that I got to be around, and I'm still to this day. I mean, I've learned so much from working on this record with Blake. I mean, he's really opened me up to a lot of possibilities, and really has probably changed my approach to composition and just being in the studio. So it's been really brilliant from that perspective.
Well, a high compliment.
That's beautiful. I'm very cognizant of not wanting to take too much of your guys' time. So, but before we call this, I do have to ask, because I don't know if it was on Instagram or somewhere. I heard through the grapevine that you recorded Pino's bass with a stethoscope.
Which
now we could tell you, we'd have to kill you.
And we have the medical supplies to get rid of a body.
All right. So, but can I just ask, because so hearing about this, my dad is a doctor, so I called him and I was like, are there stethoscopes that can convert the signal into audio? And he said there's one, and it's called The One. And I told him I would ask, is that the brand of stethoscope that you used?
We tried to get The One, and the medical supply center out in LA was fresh out. Yeah, it was the Nun for us. But
So what did you do? How did?
Okay, well, look, if I did do it, and I'm not saying that I did or I didn't, but if I did do it, it would have something to do with a standard stethoscope, Pino holding his breath for about 4 minutes and 30 seconds. The Sennheiser binaural head, and some serious gain staging.
All right, I'm envisioning the Sennheiser binaural head with stethoscopes in its ears, and I hope that that's what happened. But I understand needing to hold your cards close to your chest. So
yeah, now you get it. Otherwise they'll never send us one of those newfangled stethoscopes.
Okay, all right. So if anyone in the medical community is watching, please give Blake Mills the one sponsorship.
Yeah, send us your extra one.
All right, guys. Well, I know you have busy days ahead, so I don't want to take up too much of your time, but thank you so much. This has been an incredible pleasure to talk to you both. I'm so excited about the record. It's really fucking amazing.
Thanks, Brian.
And I wish you both the best. Are there plans to perform the music? Given the circumstances with the pandemic,
there's intent. There's a desire to perform the music.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We're all kind of on standby to figure out what we can do as performers, and as a society. So we'll get there. And for me, as somebody who's not typically keen on touring and traveling and performing like this, I will say that this record has been something that for a long time I've been eager to get out and be a part of the live performances of, and Pino and I are both we can spend hours talking about food and restaurants around the world, so we're hoping that we can incorporate some food tourism into the routing of said tour.
Yeah. Well said.
Cool. Well, if you guys come to New York, as far as I know, there's not going to be any public gatherings for a good long while. But if here's hoping that you'll get to play somewhere here in the city, so I can come say hi and enjoy the music. So
for sure, we'll get there.
Cool.
Yeah, we would love.
Cool.
Yeah. Well, thanks for doing this.